All right, so for today's lesson, we are going to move into dividing decimals by a decimal, and it looks a little bit different than when we were dividing by a whole number. So if I go ahead and set this problem up, so I have $1.20 and I'm dividing it by 20 cents. So if I take my $1.20 and I put that inside the box and I put my 20 cents outside the box, we have learned so far that when we divide decimals, we bring the decimal straight up. However, that only works when we have a whole number. I don't have a whole number, I have a decimal. So what I want to do is I want to get 20 cents to be a whole number. So to get 20 cents to be a whole number, I'm going to multiply 20 or 20 cents times 100. And so when I multiply 20 cents times 100, what that's going to do is that's going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. And so I end up with 20. So now I have a whole number. By moving the decimal 2 places to the left, I now have a whole number. I now have 20. However, I can't just do something over here to the 20 cents without doing the same thing over to the $1.20. So I need to take $1.20 and I need to multiply that by 100 as well. Because when I multiply by 100, it allows me to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right. So 1, 2, and then now I have a whole number over here. I can bring my decimal straight up. So my decimal is going to live here. So when we were dividing by a whole number, we were bringing the decimal straight up, but when we are dividing by a decimal, we have to first move the decimal in my divisor. And because I move the decimal in my divisor, I have to move it the same number of places in my dividend, and then I can bring the decimal straight up. So when I take a look at this, I'm going to do 20, and I'm looking at how many times 20 can go into now 120. It's because I've already done the decimal. So 20 goes into 126 times. So 20 times 6 would be 120, and I would subtract and I would have 0 left over. So my answer here would be 6. So when I look at how many times 20 cents goes into $1.20, it's going to go in there 6 times. Okay? So when we take a look at our next problem. So our next problem is going to be in your visual learning on page 338. It says Michelle purchases several bottles of water. Before taxes added, the total cost is $3.60. And the cost of each bottle is $1.20. Okay, so I have $3.60 divided by $1.20. And I want to know how many water bottles did she buy? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set my problem up into my algorithm. And you'll notice that on that page you have a nice model where it took $1.20 and it broke $3.60 up by $1.20. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look over here. I have a decimal. So I need to move my decimal over to make this a whole number. So I need to move it over 2 places to the right. So I'm going to move it over 2 places. So 1, 2. Now my decimal lives here. But if I do that with my divisor, or I need to make sure that I do it with my dividend. So I need to move my decimal over 1, 2 places. And then once I move my decimal over 2 places, I bring it straight up. So my decimal is going to live here after the 0. Then I look at how many times 120 goes into 360. So if I look at it as 36 and 12, 12 is going to go into 36 3 times. So 120 times 3 is going to be 360. I'm going to subtract, and I'm left with 0. So my answer here is Michelle would be able to buy 3 water bottles. Okay. All right. So let's move into your guided practice. And so the first question that is asked on your guided practice, it says, when dividing by a decimal, why can you multiply the divisor and dividend by the same power of 10? So why am I able to move that decimal? And so when I multiply by the same power of 10, so multiplying by the same power of 10 allows me, let me get my finger caught up, by the same power of 10, the decimal does not, the quotient does not change. That's UO. Quotient doesn't change because I multiplied both sides, or the dividend and the divisor, by the power of 10 by the same power of 10. The quotient doesn't change, which is why I can divide by the same power of 10. So I have to move the decimal over the same in both my divisor and my dividend. Okay. Number 2, what power of 10 would you multiply by the dividend and by the divisor? So I'm going to do 2 and 8500ths divided by 9500ths to make it easier to add or to divide. So I have to look at the divisor first. That tells me what power of 10. So in order to move this, I would have to multiply it by 10 by 100. So 100, when we talk about power of 10, is going to be 10 to the second power. And so I have to move my decimal over here by 10 to the second power. So 1, 2. So it's going to move by 10 to the second power. So 10 to the second power is going to be the power of 10 I would use to make this easier to divide, because now I can look at it as 285 divided by 95. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'm going to start by looking at problem number 3. When I look at problem number 3, I have 5/10 divided into 2. So again, we seem to be struggling as a group looking at where the decimal lives. The decimal always lives after the one place. So it doesn't have a decimal here, but it's always going to be after the ones place. 2 is a 1-digit number, so it's in the ones place. So my decimal is there. I'm going to go ahead and add a 0. I have to move the decimal over in 5/10 over to 1 to make this a whole number. And if I move it over by 1 here, I need to move it over by 1 here, and then I bring it straight up. So my decimal is going to live there. And then I look at how many times 5 goes into 20. So 5 is going to go into 24 times. 5 times 4 is 20. I'm going to subtract, and I'm left with 0. So my answer for this problem is going to be 4. Okay. My next one that I'm going to take a look at is I have 1 in 2500ths, and I'm going to divide that by 2500ths. So I'm going to look at moving the decimal here. I have to move it 2 places over. So I have to multiply it by 10 to the second power to be able to move it 2 places over. So here that means I have to multiply it by 10 to the second power to move it 2 places over. And then I can bring my decimal straight up. And so my decimal is going to live after the 125. And then I look at how many times 25 goes into 125. So how many quarters is 125? It's going to be 5 quarters. 25 times 5 is 125. I subtract, and I get 0 left over. Okay. I have 2 and 1/10 divided by 7/10. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to move my decimal over 1 place in each, because I can multiply this by 10 to the first power, which means I have to multiply this by 10 to the first power to move the decimal. And when I do that, now I can solve by looking at how many times 7 goes into 21. 7 goes into 21 3 times. So I get 21. I subtract, so my answer is going to be 3. Last one that we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at 6 and 6/10 divided by 3/10. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move my decimal over 1 place, which means I need to move it over 1 place here, and then I bring it straight up. 3 goes into 6, or 3 goes into 66, your choice. I'm going to look at 3 goes into 6 2 times. 3 times 2 is 6. I'm going to subtract, get a 0, bring down the 6. 3 goes into 6 2 times. 3 times 2 is 6. I subtract, I get 0. So my answer is going to be 22. Problems down in your independent practice. So I'm going to take a look at number 12. And so number 12, I have 400ths, and I'm going to divide that into 4 and 5600ths. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 400ths, and I'm going to move the decimal over 2 places, which means in my dividend I need to move the decimal over 2 places and then bring it straight up. And then I look at how many times 4 goes into 456. So 4 is going to go into 4 1 time, and that becomes 4. I'm going to subtract. I have 0 left over. I bring down the 5. 4 goes into 5 1 time. That becomes 4. I'm going to subtract. I have 1 left over. I bring down the 6. 4 goes into 16 4 times. That's 16. I have 0 left over. So my answer is going to be 114. Okay. I'm going to move into number 16. So number 16, I have 8/10, and I am dividing that into 56.8. And so I need to move the decimal over 1 to get 8/10 to be 8. So I need to move the decimal over 1 in my dividend. I'm going to bring it straight up. Decimal goes right there. 8's going to go into 56 7 times. 8 times 7 is 56. I'm going to subtract. I have 0 left over. I'm going to bring down the 8. 8 goes into 8 1 time. 8 times 1 is 8. Subtract. I have 0 left over. So my answer is going to be 71. Okay. So at this point in time, I'm going to have you guys move into your independent practice. You are going to do problems 7 through 17 odd. You're going to do 19, 22, and 23 on your math practices and problem solving on the back. When you take a look at 7 through 7 and 9, you have to tell me the power of 10. So let me give you guys an example of what that's going to look like. So I have 73 and 2/10 divided by 6/10. And it says, write the power of 10 you'd multiply by the divisor to make it a whole number, then write the equivalent problem. So here I would move the decimal. Let me change colors. I'm going to move the decimal 1 time to the left. So if I'm moving it, 1 time to the right. So if I'm moving it 1 time to the right, that's going to be 10 to the first power. And so then I'm going to move this decimal 1 time to the right. So the equivalent problem that I'm going to have is going to be 732 divided by 6. Okay, so I actually did that problem backwards. You need to start looking at the divisor. So let me do one more really quick. Then I have 2 and 73/100 that I am dividing by 0 and 78/100. So I have to start by looking at the divisor. So the divisor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I have to move it 2 places to the right. So if I'm moving values 2 places to the right, I'm going to multiply that by 10 to the second power. And so if I'm multiplying this by 10 to the second power, it means I have to multiply 72 and 73/100 by 10 to the second power. So the equivalent problem would be 273 divided by 78. So that's what you're going to do for problem 7 and 9. And then 11 through 17. I'm sorry, I'm going to change that. Not 11 through 17. 11 through, I just added some more problems. So I know you're all going, oh no. You're going to do 11 or 17 through 21. I added 2 more problems. I think you guys can handle 2 more problems. So you're going to do 7 through 21 odd, 19. I totally boogered that up. Let's retry that. You're going to do 7 through 21 odd. You're going to do problem 24, 30, and 31 are the problems that you guys are going to do for your practice for today.